Scotland is in chaos, and the story you've been told is a lie. Labour didn't just win a by-election, they may have stolen it. Now, in a stunning and historic twist, the King has stepped in. Yes, the monarch, silent for decades, has shattered his usual restraint and quietly blocked Labour's so-called victory. Why? Because the truth behind the Hamilton by-election is darker, more disturbing, and more dangerous than anyone expected. What began as a 602 vote win has exploded into a full-scale scandal, and this time, the Crown isn't staying silent. Just hours ago, Britain witnessed something extraordinary. In a country where the royal family rarely interferes in active politics, King Charles has broken that silence. Sources close to Buckingham Palace have confirmed that the King is refusing to officially recognise Labour's win in Hamilton. What should have been a simple ceremonial nod has turned into a royal blockade. The reason? Shocking evidence of electoral fraud, manipulation and voter tampering that's now spreading like wildfire through Scotland's political system. And while Labour's leaders scramble to maintain the illusion of a clean win, the walls are closing in fast. Labour's Anas Sawar called the Hamilton result a turning point for Scotland. But what if it's not a turn toward hope? What if it's a descent into deception? The signs were there from the beginning. Whistleblowers from inside South Lanarkshire Council warned of last-minute vote spikes, mysterious absentee ballots, and addresses on postal returns that don't even exist. But instead of investigating, officials rushed the result through, declaring Davy Russell the winner by a paper-thin margin. 602 votes. That's all. And yet even that tiny lead is now being questioned. The Crown's intervention isn't symbolic, it's constitutional. When the monarch chooses to withhold recognition of a parliamentary result, the alarm bells aren't just ringing, they're shattering glass. Royal advisors have quietly briefed top officials that the King will not issue formal acknowledgements, honours, or ceremonial participation related to the Hamilton outcome. In practice, that means Labour's victory has no royal legitimacy, and that shakes the very foundation of parliamentary democracy. For a party claiming to defend democratic values, Labour is now on the wrong end of history. Behind closed doors, pressure is mounting. A leaked memo from the Electoral Commission reveals that irregularities in Hamilton are statistically improbable and require urgent review. Observers on the ground reported a disproportionate number of duplicate names, missing registration links, and even evidence suggesting manipulation in the vote-tallying software used during the count. But you won't hear that on BBC News. You won't read it in The Guardian. Instead, the media are still celebrating Labour's razor-thin win, hoping you'll forget the cracks forming beneath their narrative. The timing couldn't be more damning. The by-election followed the death of SNP MSP Christina McKelvey, a solemn moment hijacked for political advantage. Labour didn't campaign with hope. They didn't run on vision. Their strategy was fear, division and hate against the SNP. Even then, they barely scraped a win. And now, with the Crown withholding recognition, that win is starting to look like the biggest political disaster Labour has faced in years. Because this isn't just a scandal, it's a constitutional earthquake. More revelations are coming. Internal Crown Office emails, now under legal review, suggest that multiple watchdog organisations issued emergency filings the night of the count. These filings requested immediate recounts, software audits, and a full freeze of official declarations. Yet the result was rushed forward, as if someone was desperate to cement a win before the truth could surface. What are they hiding, and who gave the order to ignore the warnings? Labour's silence is deafening. Davy Russell, who claimed to speak for the people, has vanished from interviews. Anas Sawar has gone from celebration speeches to dodging questions, and across social media, reports of voter fraud are being flagged, shadow banned, or removed entirely. It's a coordinated attempt to erase the story. But the King's move has made that impossible. When the head of state raises a red flag, it forces the country to stop and look. And what we're now seeing isn't democracy in action, it's democracy under attack. In this critical moment, the questions grow louder. Was the Hamilton by-election rigged? Is Labour complicit? And will the monarchy's intervention trigger a wider investigation into the integrity of future votes? The stakes couldn't be higher. For decades, Labour positioned itself as the party of fairness and transparency. But if this win falls apart, if it's revealed to be built on fraud and silence, then their entire narrative collapses. Scotland won't just reject Labour, it may never trust them again. And that's exactly why the Crown is acting now. Not to pick sides, not to play politics, but to protect something far more valuable: public trust. Because when elections can be stolen, when results are manipulated, and when voices are silenced, the entire system breaks. And once that trust is gone, there's no getting it back. As the dust begins to settle around the explosive events in Hamilton, what's becoming clear is that this isn't a one-off incident. The by-election may have been the flashpoint, but it's exposing something far more systemic, an erosion of electoral integrity across the entire Scottish political landscape. The King's decision to block recognition of Labour's controversial win wasn't made lightly. Royal sources indicate the Crown had received multiple briefings from senior constitutional lawyers and former election auditors, all warning of serious discrepancies that could not be ignored. One legal expert reportedly described the Hamilton by-election as a textbook case of electoral irregularity, urging immediate intervention to prevent long-term damage to public confidence in the democratic process. Behind the scenes, the corridors of power in both Holyrood and Westminster are in turmoil. Pressure is mounting on the Electoral Commission to launch a full forensic audit. But insiders claim Labour operatives are lobbying to delay or soften the scope of the investigation. At the centre of the storm is the discovery that hundreds of postal ballots were sent to addresses linked to vacant properties, care homes with no registered residents, and even demolished buildings. This data has emerged from whistleblowers inside South Lanarkshire Council, who are now seeking legal protection to go public. One leaked statement alleges that senior council officials were instructed to process ballots without full verification, effectively opening the door for large-scale abuse. Adding fuel to the fire, internal SNP sources have begun leaking documents showing that their party raised concerns weeks before the vote. Emails between local SNP organisers and election officials warned of unusual spikes in early voting patterns, particularly in wards where Labour's ground game was weakest. In one case, a ballot box was reportedly returned to the counting centre with tamper evidence seals broken, yet no formal report was filed. These concerns were never addressed. Instead, they were buried beneath a mountain of bureaucratic silence. And now the cover-up may be just as scandalous as the fraud itself. King Charles's move to withhold ceremonial recognition has emboldened critics of the Labour Party across the UK. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has already called for a parliamentary inquiry, declaring the by-election rotten to its core. Tory backbenchers are reportedly preparing letters to the Speaker demanding urgent debate. Even within Labour's own ranks, unease is spreading. A handful of senior MPs have privately admitted they're deeply uncomfortable with the silence surrounding the allegations. But breaking ranks in today's Labour Party comes at a cost. Whistleblowers face threats of deselection, career sabotage, and even smear campaigns orchestrated by party insiders determined to protect the leadership at all costs. Meanwhile, the media blackout is starting to crack. Independent journalists and alternative platforms have begun piecing together the timeline of events, exposing a tangled web of inconsistencies, cover-ups, and unanswered questions. Why was there a rush to declare results despite multiple formal objections? Why were basic security protocols abandoned during the ballot count? And why are Labour's leaders refusing to allow a transparent, independent review of the vote? These questions are gaining traction with the public, especially in Scotland, where many voters now feel their voices were manipulated or erased. Public anger is intensifying. In Hamilton, protests have erupted outside council offices. Crowds are demanding answers, and they're not waiting for permission. "We want the truth, not a trophy win," shouted one local resident, echoing the sentiment of thousands who feel betrayed by the political machine. Online petitions calling for a recount and criminal investigation have already amassed tens of thousands of signatures. If this pressure continues, Labour won't just face embarrassment, they'll face legal consequences that could upend their entire Scottish campaign strategy. The King's involvement has fundamentally changed the nature of this crisis. For years, the monarchy has been a silent observer of British politics, intervening only in moments of grave national importance. This is one of those moments. Royal legal advisers have made it clear that the withholding of ceremonial recognition is a constitutional signal, one that invites deeper scrutiny, not just of Hamilton, but of how electoral fairness is safeguarded in the UK. If this precedent stands, it could open the door to broader royal oversight of controversial elections in future, especially when there is credible evidence of fraud. But the stakes are even higher than that. If Labour's win in Hamilton is ultimately overturned, or even cast into doubt, it could set off a chain reaction across Scotland. Several marginal constituencies, won by Labour in recent years, may come under similar scrutiny. Whistleblowers in other councils are reportedly preparing to come forward, emboldened by the Crown's stance. There is growing speculation that Hamilton may not be the only by-election tainted by fraud. And if that's true, Labour's hopes for a Scottish resurgence could collapse almost overnight. Anas Sawar's leadership is now under direct threat. Once seen as Labour's best hope to reclaim Scotland from the SNP, he's now facing allegations of turning a blind eye to fraud to secure a symbolic win. His refusal to address the growing mountain of evidence is being seen by critics as a deliberate attempt to stall for time while the party prepares damage control. But time is not on his side. Each new leak, each new witness, each new revelation adds another crack to the facade. And when it finally breaks, the fallout will be devastating. This is more than political scandal. It's a test of democracy itself. If the people of Hamilton were denied a fair election, then every democratic institution in the UK has a responsibility to respond. The Crown has taken the first step. Now the question is whether Parliament, the courts and the people will follow. The truth is no longer buried. It's rising fast. And Labour can no longer hide behind a manufactured victory. In the next section, we dive deeper into the evidence that triggered the King's unprecedented move, the sealed reports, the insider testimonies, and the explosive links to foreign interference that are now being investigated in secret. What really happened inside the Hamilton ballot room, and who gave the final order to silence the objections. The deeper we go into the murky details of the Hamilton by-election, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't just a case of minor administrative mistakes or unfortunate coincidences. This was an operation, a coordinated, premeditated scheme designed to manipulate the outcome of a democratic process. At the heart of this operation lies a damning collection of sealed evidence files now being reviewed by senior royal advisors and independent legal experts. These documents, leaked in part by civil servants disgusted by what they witnessed, contain photographic records, ballot chain of custody failures, and internal emails that show direct interference with the electoral process. One email, marked urgent, includes instructions from a regional Labour organiser telling staff to fast-track priority ballots. A euphemism critics claim was used to process fraudulent votes before any challenges could be raised. Witness statements now circulating among investigative journalists detail troubling events on election day. One poll station worker claims that staff were told to overlook ID inconsistencies and not escalate unless directly ordered. Another said that 3 full boxes of ballots arrived from a remote ward well past the legal deadline, yet were counted anyway. One of the most shocking accounts comes from a counting station supervisor who says he personally witnessed ballots being placed into bundles already marked for Labour, without verification. When he raised concerns, he was told to shut it down or lose your position. These testimonies are now forming the basis of a potential private prosecution, should the Crown Prosecution Service fail to act. Perhaps most explosive is the emerging theory that external interference may have played a role. Data analysts reviewing voting patterns have identified irregular clusters, digital signatures that suggest automated submissions in certain areas with postal vote surges. These spikes didn't match historical trends and occurred in segments of the electorate previously marked as low engagement. Cybersecurity experts are now investigating whether foreign influence, possibly through compromised voter registration systems, could have enabled ballot stuffing or result manipulation. While no official source has confirmed these suspicions, intelligence agencies are reported to be quietly gathering data and watching closely. The royal household is also reviewing private intelligence gathered by retired MI5 officers working in advisory roles. These retired agents, known for their discretion and connections, were brought in after initial briefings from the Electoral Integrity Unit triggered concerns at the highest levels of the monarchy. According to leaked notes, one operative described the Hamilton result as compromised beyond reasonable doubt, warning that allowing it to stand would invite further abuse in future contests. The King, constitutionally neutral but morally obligated, responded with the only tool at his disposal, refusing recognition and demanding accountability. Inside the Labour Party, panic is spreading. Keir Starmer has been briefed repeatedly on the situation, but remains silent in public. Behind closed doors, however, his legal team is reportedly scrambling to prepare for potential fallout. Senior strategists fear that if the Hamilton win is disqualified, it will not only undermine their Scottish narrative, it could collapse their momentum nationwide. The Scottish branch of the party, once considered a rising star after a decade of SNP dominance, is now a political minefield. Candidates are distancing themselves from Sarwar, local donors are pulling funding, and whispers of a leadership challenge are beginning to surface, particularly from MPs in vulnerable constituencies who fear they may be next. Meanwhile, Reform UK and the Conservatives are ramping up pressure. Nigel Farage has launched a full-scale campaign to expose what he calls Labour's election theft. He's demanded a criminal investigation and called on Scotland Yard to seize voting records before they're destroyed or altered. The Conservatives, emboldened by the King's intervention, have submitted formal complaints and are drafting emergency motions for Parliament. What began as a local political row has erupted into a constitutional firestorm. Public trust is hanging by a thread. In towns across Scotland, voter forums have turned into heated town halls, with citizens demanding immediate transparency. A retired judge speaking at one forum warned that if no action is taken, Scotland's democracy will die in darkness. Social media is ablaze with citizen journalism, amateur sleuths, and viral clips showing suspicious ballot behaviour. Hashtags like #HamiltonFraud and #RoyalBlock are trending nationally. The people are not waiting for permission to be outraged. They are demanding justice now. This pressure is forcing institutions to respond. The Electoral Commission, initially slow and evasive, has now agreed to review procedures, but many critics believe this is merely a stalling tactic. Only a fully independent inquiry, backed by royal endorsement and legal force, will be enough to restore credibility. Civil society groups, including election monitoring watchdogs and retired judges, are preparing a legal roadmap for such a review. They argue that without it, the entire UK voting system may be compromised in future elections. But there's another layer of this drama that's only now coming into focus: the potential role of internal Labour factions. Sources close to the party say that rival groups within Labour may have known about the fraud and allowed it to happen as part of a broader power struggle. Some speculate that a radical wing of the party viewed the by-election as a test run, an opportunity to see how far the system could be pushed without detection. If this is true, it points to a chilling reality.
Labour's alleged rigging wasn't just about winning a seat, it was about testing the limits of electoral manipulation on British soil. The monarchy's involvement has exposed not only a single fraudulent result, but possibly an entire strategy of deceit. The King's refusal to remain silent sends a powerful message. The sanctity of British elections cannot be compromised for political gain. His actions have stirred something dormant in the nation's consciousness, a belief that truth still matters, that justice can prevail, and that the people will not be silenced by power. As the storm intensifies, we must now turn to the next critical question. What will Parliament do? Will MPs heed the growing cries for justice, or will they retreat into silence to protect their own political interests? In Section 4, we'll examine how Westminster is responding to the crisis, who's speaking out, who's hiding in the shadows, and how this one by-election may shake the foundations of British politics for years to come. As the fallout from the Hamilton by-election scandal spreads across the political landscape, all eyes are now fixed on Westminster. The corridors of Parliament, once buzzing with the usual political theatre, have turned tense and charged with unease. Behind the closed doors of select committees and private member briefings, there's growing alarm that the crisis has now outpaced party politics and crossed into constitutional territory. The question that lingers on every MP's mind is chillingly simple. If this fraudulent victory is allowed to stand, what does it say about the state of British democracy? Parliamentary response, however, has been anything but united. On one side, members of Reform UK and several senior Conservative MPs are aggressively calling for a full inquiry. Led by Nigel Farage, whose political instincts for crises like this are razor-sharp, the Reform camp has already submitted an emergency petition demanding that the Hamilton election be nullified. Farage, speaking outside Parliament, described the by-election as a weaponised farce and accused Labour of election tampering on an industrial scale. The Reform petition includes a request for a royal commission to investigate electoral integrity across the entire UK, citing Hamilton as just the tip of the iceberg. Meanwhile, Conservative MPs are split. Some back the call for justice, alarmed at the implications of allowing fraudulent wins to take hold. Others, wary of destabilising the broader electoral framework, are urging caution. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has emerged as one of the most vocal critics of Labour, warning in a televised interview that we are witnessing the erosion of trust in our democracy and that trust cannot be restored with platitudes or shallow reviews. Braverman also hinted at deep-rooted corruption within the Electoral Commission itself, suggesting that systemic reform may be the only way forward. But perhaps the most deafening silence comes from Labour's own benches. Keir Starmer, who has so far refused to address the allegations directly, is now under immense pressure from within his own ranks. Several backbench Labour MPs, particularly those in marginal constituencies, are reportedly furious that the party leadership has allowed this scandal to fester without a clear response. There are whispers that some may defect or resign if a cover-up is confirmed. Angela Rayner, usually a firebrand voice in the party, has been conspicuously absent from interviews and debates. Her silence is being read as a strategic retreat, or, worse, complicity. Adding to the complexity is the growing fear among MPs that the monarchy's involvement has changed the stakes. The King's refusal to acknowledge the Hamilton result is unprecedented in modern British politics. While constitutionally symbolic, the monarchy's gesture has created a moral benchmark that Parliament cannot ignore. For some MPs especially, traditionalists and constitutionalists, the King's actions have validated the concerns of millions of Britons who feel that their votes no longer count. For others, however, it has intensified panic, as it suggests a level of national crisis not seen since the Brexit turmoil. Public pressure is building at an extraordinary pace. Petitions demanding a re-election in Hamilton have already gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures. Grassroots movements, led by citizen coalitions and independent media watchdogs, are organising marches across Scotland and London under the banner of Restore the Vote. These groups are calling not only for justice in Hamilton, but for sweeping reform in postal voting, vote counting transparency, and oversight of party election machinery. A leaked document from a high-level Cabinet Office meeting shows that civil unrest is now considered a moderate to high risk scenario if no action is taken within the next fortnight. Media coverage is also reaching fever pitch. Investigative journalists from The Times, The Telegraph, and independent platforms are publishing daily exposés detailing how ballot records were allegedly tampered with, who oversaw suspicious courier drop-offs, and which officials were warned ahead of time yet failed to intervene. One damning report revealed that a Labour-aligned logistics firm was contracted to transport ballot boxes in the Hamilton area, raising serious questions about impartiality and conflict of interest. While Labour denies wrongdoing, the optics of such arrangements are devastating. In the House of Lords, a rare unity is emerging among crossbench peers who are demanding clarity and accountability. A special session has been proposed to examine legislative reforms that would require stricter voter ID laws, real-time ballot tracking systems, and independent monitors at every major election. Lord Sumption, a former Supreme Court Justice and respected voice on constitutional law, stated during a recent speech that Hamilton is not merely a scandal, it is a fracture in the very spine of parliamentary legitimacy. The King's Privy. Council is now considering whether to call an emergency session to issue formal guidance on electoral protocol in contested scenarios. Though their powers are largely advisory, such an action would signal extraordinary royal concern and further destabilise Labour's ability to sweep the crisis under the rug. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace has maintained its silence following the King's initial rebuke. But insiders suggest that the King is being briefed daily and will not hesitate to make further symbolic interventions if Parliament continues to stall. For Prime Minister Starmer, the noose is tightening. Internal memos suggest Labour HQ is preparing multiple contingency strategies, including possible legal challenges to delay any ruling on Hamilton, PR campaigns to shift focus onto other issues, and even consideration of calling a snap general election to reframe the crisis as a political witch hunt. But these moves risk backfiring spectacularly. Already, polls show a sharp drop in Labour's credibility in Scotland, with Reform UK gaining rapidly among disaffected voters. Parliament now stands at a crossroads. Will it honour the monarchy's stand and defend the integrity of the ballot box, or will it allow political convenience to eclipse democratic principles? The next few days will define not only the future of the Labour Party, but the fate of British parliamentary democracy itself. The clock is ticking, and the nation is watching. In Section 5, we will examine how the legal system is responding to the Hamilton fraud and the critical role the judiciary may play in what could become the most consequential electoral trial in British history.